Good evening, everybody. Just first of all, checking that people can hear me and see me okay. I'm getting some vague nods from other people who I can see. That's great. So good evening. Thanks for coming to this engagement event. This is the first in a series of events that we're running to share the draft London Plan guidance on circular economy statements, which is currently undergoing consultation. This is our agenda for the session, and as I talk you through it, I'll be introducing this evening's panel of speakers. To introduce myself first, I'm Rob McNichol, one of the policy team leaders in the London Plan team at the Greater London Authority. I'm going to be chairing this evening's event, and I'll give you a few housekeeping notices in a moment. We'll then have 3 presentations. The first presentation will be given by David Cheshire from ACOM. Dave's a regional director at ACOM, and he's been working with the GLA to implement the circular economy statement guidance. And his team works reviewing circular economy statements on behalf of the GLA. Give us a wave, Dave. For those of you who don't know, the GLA works closely with ACOM to help us deliver a whole range of environmental policy objectives, including developing this guidance. So Dave's going to give us an intro to circular economy principles and how they can be applied to the built environment. Then we'll have Rohan Ranawira. Rohan's been working as a senior strategic planner within the London Plan team at the GLA. He's led on drafting and developing the guidance. Give us a wave, Rohan. Rohan's going to take us through the draft guidance and how we envisage it informing development proposals as they come forward. Then our third speaker will be Andrea Charlton from the London Waste and Recycling Board. Andrea is the project manager for the Horizon 2020 funded Circuit project, which aims to support the creation of regenerative cities through implementing sustainable and circular construction practices. Say hello, Andrea. Andrea is going to tell us about the Circuit project and how it's helping to drive forward circular economy practices in the built environment. And then, as is traditional, we'll have an opportunity for some questions. And hopefully our session will last around, I think we said about an hour and a half or so, but we'll see how we go. So a few bits of housekeeping before we crack on. Firstly, just to let you know that the session today is going to be being recorded, so other people can watch it later. Secondly, to say that the way to ask questions is through the Q&A function, which you'll find on the bottom of your screens, hopefully. Depending on how many questions we get, we might not be able to go through and answer them all, but we'll do our best. Please do start putting questions in as they come to you. We'll pick these up either between the presentations or at the end, so don't wait until right at the end to write your questions down. If you've got any technical problems, please use the chat function. We're not going to be using this for answering questions or having other discussions, but we're supported today by Natalie and Natalie, who will try to help you if you encounter any problems. So just a very quick reminder from me about the London Plan. So the London Plan is officially the spatial development strategy for London. It sets out how the Mayor envisages London developing over the next 25 years. And it includes both an overall spatial vision for where London will grow and how this will come about, as well as more detailed policies that guide how development should be brought forward. We're now effectively on a 3rd London Plan, depending on how you count them. And each of the 3 mayors we've had, so Ken Livingstone, Boris Johnson and now Sadiq Khan, have produced their own new London Plan. This version is very nearly finished. We've been through the examination and we're just waiting for the Secretary of State to give it his final sign-off. We're intended to publish early next year. To support the plan, the Mayor also publishes London Plan Guidance, or LPG. This goes through a consultation process, which is what we're doing now, and it's accompanied by an equalities impact assessment. The guidance is used when developers are designing their schemes and when planning applications are being decided. I'll share this again at the end, so you don't have to make a note of it right now, but just to let you know that the consultation deadline is the 15th of January next year. There's a survey on that website that's got the link to it there, which asks for your views on the draft guidance. And we can provide that survey in alternative formats to meet different accessibility requirements if need be. You can also email us any queries at circulareconomylpg@london.gov.uk. and you can follow the GLA planning team on Twitter. I'm now planning to hand over to Dave, but I've got a slightly flickery screen. I don't know if there were any problems with people hearing me. I'm getting shaking heads. This is excellent. Great. In that case, I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll hand over to you, Dave.
Brilliant, thank you. Let's put this up. Okay, is that okay with everyone? Okay, thanks. Yeah, so I just want to briefly just outline the sort of basic, how the circular economy principles apply to, and how the circular economy applies to buildings. So the built environment has a massive impact on the planet and on the environment. So this first slide is really just showing mining for bauxite in the Amazon rainforest, and bauxite is used to make aluminium. So all the times when we're specifying aluminium in our buildings, then there's a good chance that it's coming from somewhere that's busy trashing rainforests or other precious environments across the planet. And obviously that's not just impact on the planet, but also on local people in terms of poor mining practice and all sorts of things. So that's one end of the scale. We're digging loads of stuff out of the ground like that, and then the other end of the scale, we are demolishing our buildings at quite an astonishing rate. Quite often, working on some projects that have, buildings are being knocked down after 40 years, sometimes even 30 years into their life, which it seems incredibly quick. And this image as well is really useful to show just how crude that whole process is, and that actually what we end up with is nothing terribly useful. And down the bottom here, for example, this is all all this rubble would be crushed and used, probably downcycled into a lower grade materials such as road bases or pile mats. It's unlikely or won't be used as new structural concrete to make a new building out of. And even the metals and plastics, although the metals are very valuable, it's a pretty complex job to dig all that stuff out, get all that stuff out of there in that big tangle there. And actually they're quite often contaminated with other alloys and coatings and things, other metals, which means that they are hard to actually recycle at the same value. So there's a tendency for everything to be downcycled to a lower value material. So joining those two together, this is very much the linear economy. We dig stuff out of the ground, use it for a while, and then we chuck it away, and we have to find something to do with it. Whereas the whole idea of the circular model is circular economy, and the circular model is to make it a much more circular process where we're actually reusing and keeping the value of our resources indefinitely, having won them at some point in the past. So to boil it down to some very simple principles, the idea for buildings anyway is that we retain, refit and refurbish our buildings in preference to demolishing and building new, and then if we are building new, then we design them so that they are easier and to keep and be adaptable in the long term, so we can keep buildings around a lot longer. And then those outer three circles are talking about how we would reclaim and reuse and salvage bits of the building, and then potentially remanufacture bits of the building as well. For example, building services would be a really good example of how we might be able to in the future to actually remanufacture bits of buildings rather than shredding them all and having to dispose of them. And then the outer layer is talking about recycling and what happens, the sort of last resort, which is we recycle rather than downcycle our technical materials, and any biological materials such as timbers and fabric and stuff would be composted and returned to the biosphere. And then on top of that, just to layer up, there are a set of design principles that we would apply to circular buildings, and these are there summarized there. But I mean, a lot of these are not new principles designed for designing out waste, something that RAP has been talking about for a very long time. So there's quite a lot of literature around that. Designing for adaptability is something that people have been looking at, about the sort of loose fit idea of making buildings around for a long time. And design for disassembly, again, has been written about, but is not done very often. And that's something I think that's very important as part of the circular economy, to take the building apart and or bits of the building out and to reuse it. And obviously selecting materials that are environmentally preferable and can be easily recycled and reused. And then around the outside there is some other sort of broader concepts around circular business models, which is this idea that can we pay per use for bits of the building, rather than having to buy. If we buy everything, we have become consumers. We buy it, we use it for a while, and then we're responsible for the whole life of it. Whereas potentially we could be actually passing that responsibility back, keeping that with the manufacturer and enabling them to actually be responsible for the life and the end of the life of that product, and maybe return it back to them end of life. And then lastly, this idea of waste as a resource, which is this sort of borrowed from nature, this idea that there is no such thing as waste, where from every system in nature, anything that is a waste product from one system becomes a resource for the next system and becomes a nutrient. And we do a little bit of that in buildings, but very little in terms of for things like waste from, say, the steel industry is used to make concrete a little bit more environmentally friendly through using waste products there, but there's a lot more we could be doing. So that's the basic concept. And then just to pick up one of those design concepts, building in layers, which I think is a really underlying and very important concept, before I finish, which is really just saying that buildings are incredibly complex and have thousands and thousands of components to them, and actually the different sort of layers of the building have very different lifespans, with the structure of the building hopefully being around for 100 years, and then something like the bits of the building inside, so the carpets and the finishes and stuff might have a much shorter life. You might be chucking out a carpet after a couple of years because you didn't like the color or whatever it was. So anything from 2 years to 100 years, and applying different principles to that. So you might apply long life loose fit to the structure, whereas to the carpet you might say, well, this is something that we want to use of a single polymer carpet that can be returned to the manufacturer, or you make it out of biological material, so it could be chucked on the compost at the end of life instead of having to go to landfill, which it currently does. So that's the basic sort of concepts. That's it. I'll hand back. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks very much. So thanks for that really interesting and helpfully brief intro into the wonderful world of circular economy. I think that nicely sets us up to hand over to Rohan, who's going to be taking us through how we've used that information and applied it to the circular economy statement guidance.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Can you all see my screen? I think that's up now. Cool. Hello, everyone, and thanks for coming. It's good to see we've got a good turnout. I'm not sure if that's because you have nothing else to do now, you're in lockdown, but I'll try and make this as engaging as possible. As Rob said in his introduction, I'm Rohan Ranawira, and I work in the London Plan team, and I'm the policy lead for waste and the circular economy. So in my presentation, I'll be building on Dave's explanation of the circular built environment, to talk about how we're trying to achieve that through circular economy statements and the London Plan guidance we've produced on how to do a circular economy statement. And I'll start with a short intro to the policy that sits behind the guidance and circular economy statements. And then the bulk of my presentation will be on the key pieces of content that we're looking to see included in circular economy statements. So to start off with the policy context, well, the policy context from this administration. So for this mayor, you can kind of trace the commitment to a circular economy right back to the mayoral manifesto in 2016, where Sadiq Khan committed to lead on reducing the city's waste footprint and working to increase recycling and cut the amount of waste London sends to landfill. And then in 2018, in the same year that the Mayor declared a climate emergency, we published the London Environment Strategy, where we saw a specific focus on the transition to a low carbon circular economy. So that's the one on the left there. And as Dave said, recognizing that the built environment is a massive contributor to the waste generated in London, I think the stat we have in our primer document is that it contributes to more than half the waste material that arises in London. So recognizing that the London plan there in the middle introduced policies to support the circular economy in the things we build. And it's worth also pointing out that we published a kind of primer on designing for circularity in the built environment, which is a precursor to the document that we're talking about, the circular economy statement guidance. But I'll just put it up there because it's worth a read for a more general introduction to the topic. So to go on to in a bit more detail about the London plan policies. So there's two main policies which promote the circular economy in the built environment. One is the waste policy, SI7, and the other is a design policy, policy D3. So starting with policy D3, the London plan requires development proposals to think about how a building's use might change over time, its longevity, and the quality of build and materials. And part B13 of that policy highlights the importance of high sustainability standards, and it has a specific reference to applying circular economy principles in that policy. I think it's fair to say that this is a big change in the way we're looking at the circular economy. Whereas before it might have been thought about in terms of what we do at the end of life of a building. For example, what can we reuse or recycle, or what material we can reuse or recycle following a demolition, things that are more usually confined to our waste policies. This focus in the design policies can pushes us to think more about getting more life out of the things we do build. But having said all that, the waste policy is still a key way in which we're trying to transition to a circular economy. So SI7 has kind of a general requirement for the mayor and waste planning authorities to promote the circular economy. It has some specific waste targets that help us move towards a more sustainable use of materials in the circular economy. For example, 95% reuse and recycling of construction and demolition waste, and 65% recycling rate for household and commercial waste. And importantly for this presentation, the waste policy also introduced a requirement for referable planning applications to submit a circular economy statement. And although that's specifically in the London Plan for referable applications, we also encourage borrowers to adopt lower thresholds for circular economy statements. And the guidance that I'm talking about could be out to support any local policies. So, as I said, in the London Plan policy SI7, we introduce this requirement for circular economy statements, and in that policy, in the kind of supporting text to it, we also committed to providing some guidance for people who might be trying to put one together. And this is what we came up with. This is the circular economy statement guidance. There's been a version of this that was up that came out last year, and we've recently published a slightly updated version in October, which is the one we're consulting on now. So going into what a circular economy statement is effectively a tool to embed in the planning process, to embed circular economy into the planning process, and to get us to consider ways of making buildings more circular. And I'll speak a bit more about how you submit circular economy statements as part of the planning process towards the end. But now I'll start with introducing the core principles that the three core principles that underpin the guidance and therefore underpin what we're expecting to see from circular economy statements. So the first core principle is conserving resources, increasing efficiency, and sourcing materials sustainably. So this principle is about minimizing the need for material, and fundamentally it's about questioning whether something needs to be built from scratch, whether it needs to be built at a particular scale or in a particular way. It's also about where you do identify a need to build, sourcing the material that you do use, sourcing that sustainably, and then and specifying for example, by specifying the use of reused or recycled material. So the second principle we've got up there, designing to eliminate waste. This is about making sure buildings are designed flexibly enough so that you aren't generating waste or the need for construction work throughout the life of the building. And in particular, that could involve looking at how the users of the building or their needs might change and responding to that through time. And that principle, designing to eliminate waste, is also about designing out construction, demolition, and excavation waste. For example, by looking at opportunities to reclaim and reuse the material you find on site, and also kind of looks at the idea of designing for disassembly, which Dave talked about. The last principle we've got there is managing waste sustainably at the highest value. And this is about managing any waste that you do generate, managing that waste as high up the waste hierarchy as possible. And that involves both construction and the demolition waste, as well as waste you get from users occupying the building once it's operational. And as you'll see as we go through the content of the circular economy statements, they are structured around these three core principles, and that's why they're important. So moving on to the key elements of the circular economy statement. So these key elements, so a circular economy statement requires the applicants to translate the kind of three core principles that I've talked about into commitments and measures that will be used in a site's design, build, and operation. When you read the guidance, you'll see it explains what we expect to see in the circular economy statement in a lot more detail. But right now for this presentation, I'm going to focus on those four key elements of the statement that you can see up there. So those four are the strategic approach to the circular economy, which we've given the exciting name of Table 1 in the guidance. The circular economy commitments, also known as Table 2 in the guidance. The third element is the bill of materials, and the fourth key element is the recycling and waste reporting form. So I think it's worth saying at this point, while I use the word requirements in the last slide, I think that might make you think about targets and things like that, which the guidance does have, and we'll talk about later. But the circular economy statement is also primarily meant to be a tool for embedding circular economy thinking into the process of designing new buildings. And the strategic approach, Table 1, the first of those key elements, is a good example of this. So this part of the circular economy statement is where you'll think about your overall approach to the circular economy, given the kind of context and setting of your site. So this flow diagram I've got here, which it's in the guidance, it takes you through a process, or it guides you through a process for selecting potential approaches to the circular economy in your site, on your site. So it starts with different ways of looking at what's already on the site. And as you can see, it encourages applicants to think about maximizing opportunities to refurbishing and repurposing maximizing opportunities for refurbishing and repurposing. So that's where you that's the starting point. But then if a new building is considered the best option, you kind of move on to the bottom half of that flow chart that you can see. And that explores how you can get the most value of what new building you're designing. And the last rows in each of the halves of that diagram are kind of some broad circular economy design strategies, which I'm not going to go and do in detail now, but are explained in a lot more detail in the guidance. So yeah, so this is about the Table 1 is about deciding on your circular economy approach, and we expect it to be justified in what we call Table 1, which I'm not shown here, but again, it's in the guidance. And I think it's worth stressing at this point also that this piece of work needs to be done really, really early on in the design process. It really needs to feed into the design brief and concept design stages to be effective. And in terms of the planning process, this strategic approach section will be one of the more important bits that support the kind of pre-application. And if you're submitting an outline planning application, it will be used to, one of the main things that will be used to support that early stage application. But again, I'll talk about the kind of stages of a circular economy statement and how that interacts with the planning process, like right at the end. So moving on, so this is the next key element of a circular economy statement is what we're calling key circular economy commitments. So this is where you take that strategic approach that you've decided on and kind of move from that approach into more concrete and specific commitments. So when you're doing a circular economy statement, you need to come up with specific commitments which fulfill the core principles we introduced earlier. So conserving resources, designing to eliminate waste, and managing waste sustainably. And you can see that that's reflected in the different sections of Table 2. And we've also asked the applicants to structure their commitments in line with the building and layers concept that Dave talked about. So this means you would report on the commitments for each layer of the building. For example, the commitments relating to that structural layers or the outer layers may focus on longevity or the ability to be disassembled at the end of life, while commitments about the internal space could be more about flexibility, reacting to different user needs over time, and ease of maintenance. So moving on to the third of the 4 key elements of the circular economy statement, we've got the bill of materials, and this is really intended to encourage designers to use or to select designs that use up less material. So the bill of material requires an applicant to report the material intensity for each layer of the building. So that's the weight per unit area. And it also requires the applicant to set targets for the use of recycled and reused material, aiming for a minimum of 20%. And again, it's worth emphasizing that this aspect of the circular economy statement is meant to help you during the design process rather than being something you fill in at the end of a design stage. So we're encouraging people to use the bill of materials to compare different designs or approaches and kind of iterate towards less materially intensive designs. And finally, we get to the last key element of a circular economy statement, and this is the waste and recycling reporting form. And this primarily relates to the core principle of managing waste sustainably. That was the last core principle I talked about, and it's structured to ensure. So it's kind of structured around ensuring that the development that you're looking at helps to meet the waste targets that I mentioned earlier that are in the London Plan in policy SI7. So the top half of the table, as you can see, is about construction, demolition, and excavation waste streams. And the London Plan target for these are 95% reuse or recycling of construction and demolition waste. And in the case of excavation waste, that's 95% beneficial use, which is a term we've defined in the London Plan. And when you read the guidance, you'll see that the sections about the recycling and waste reporting form stress the kind of prioritization of reusing material on site before looking at off-site waste management, and kind of lastly, the kind of disposal options you have, such as landfill. The bottom half of the table is about the waste that the user of the building might produce once it's occupied, and the target for that is a 65% recycling rate. So that's all I really had to say on the content of a circular economy statement. And I'm not sure if I should have done this bit at the start, but this is a slide on giving an overview of the different stages of developing a circular economy statement and how they fit in with the planning process. So essentially, where we expect a circular economy statement to contain more detail the further along the development management process you go. So at pre-app stage or for outline planning permission, we're mainly looking to see you've thought about your strategic approach to circular economy, and you've detailed that in Table 1. And we're also encouraging you to fill in Table 2 with some draft circular economy commitments that build on that strategic approach. So that, yeah, for the pre-app stage, the main thing is a strategic approach, and potentially some draft circular economy commitments, and we're calling that a kind of draft circular economy statement. But the guidance explains a lot more about the content and level of detail we suggest for this. Then at the full application stage, when referable applications get referred to the mayor, we want to see a detailed circular economy statement. So that contains more detail, much more detailed circular economy commitments, and it contains the bill of materials and the recycling and waste reporting form filled in and evidenced. And yeah, just to say, it's the commitments and calculations you put in at this stage should be underpinned by stronger evidence, and you should be demonstrating that commitments, the circular economy commitments that you've got in there are achievable, and that you've included plans for how you're going to realize them. And that last point there is about us wanting to keep track of the outcomes of circular economy statements. So we're requiring post-planning updates. So you go back to your commitments that you've made in Table 2 and the bill of materials and the recycling and waste reporting form, and you'd update the kind of estimates you had with what actually happened and provide that to us to monitor. So I think that's my last slide. So that's all I had to say on the kind of content of circular economy statements. But just to note where we're at, I think Rob mentioned this already. And so we published the guidance in October, and we're in the middle of our consultation now. And the consultation closes in January. And after this, we'll review the feedback and publish the final guidance sometime next year. But the requirement for circular economy statements for referable applications is active now, and we'd expect that people be using this draft guidance that's up now to help them prepare that. And I think that's my last slide, potentially. Yeah, it says thank you, so thank you.
Thanks very much, Rohan. Thanks for taking us through that. That's really helpful. We've had some questions in, which is brilliant. Do please keep adding to those. Some of these questions are ones that I'm going to save to the Q&A at the end, but I think there's a couple that I just want to tackle now, because I think they're hopefully fairly straightforward ones that we can address. So we've got a question, which design stage is most appropriate to include a circular economy statement? I think that question came in slightly before you took us through the various stages, Rohan, but it just might be helpful to reiterate.
Yeah. So yeah, to reiterate, I think in terms of planning stages, we're expecting you to provide a circular economy, what we're calling a draft circular economy statement, to support your pre-application discussions or an outline planning permission. And the guidance tells you what you should expect to put in that draft circular economy statement. But essentially, we're looking mainly for your strategic approach and some draft circular economy commitments. That doesn't mean you don't have to, or you don't need, you don't want to kind of put more detail in there, but you try and put as much as you can. But obviously, you might not know all the stuff at that stage. And the guidance also talks about what REBA design stages are appropriate for each stage of the circular economy statement. And it kind of matches them up to the planning stages, so you can kind of see that. But yeah, at the pre-app stage, we want to see a draft circular economy statement, and the full application, we want to see something more detailed. Dave, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that if you want, but if not. Cool.
I'm taking that as a no, Dave, if you were on mute.
No, that's fine. No, that was perfect, yeah.
Great, thank you. Brilliant. So I think the other questions are somewhat more technical ones, so I think we might come back to those when we come to the Q&A rather than tackling them now. I think just worth saying, though, that obviously this is still a consultation document, it's still in draft form, and we might not be able to answer kind of all the questions with a definitive, oh, it's definitely this, and you know, the point of this exercise is to get the feedback, is to get you all to submit responses to the consultation. So yeah, and there's an opportunity for us to then take that on board and then to fold that into the final document. So this is all really, really helpful for us. I think in that case, I'll move on and hand over to Andrea, who's going to take us through the circuit project.
Sorry, the mute button moved. Thank you. Thank you, Rob. Thank you for the interesting presentations that have preceded this one. I've been working in this space trying to promote circular economy in the built environment for, I think, over 10 years. So it's actually really, really exciting to see this thinking now embedded into policy and all the work that's gone into the guidance. So just well done already. And it's actually a great honour to be here. So thank you very much. As Rob mentioned at the beginning, I work for the London Waste and Recycling Board, and we work alongside the GLA and the London boroughs to help London transition to a low carbon circular economy. We have a wide range of focus areas from food waste to plastics, textiles and electronics, but my particular focus is on the built environment. And we try to support this collaboration in lots of different ways, from brokering partnerships, creating data and insights, doing research and pilots and behaviour change campaigns. And the reason I've been asked to speak to you today is because of our current project in the built environment, which is called Circuit. I think Rob mentioned in the introduction, it's a European Union Horizon 2020 funded project, a 4-year project that started in 2019, so we're just over a year in and got 3 years left to go. And the main purpose of the project is to accelerate the uptake of circular construction practices to things that go from being niche exemplars to things that are adopted citywide, because we've been able to provide both the evidence and tools to support their implementation. The project is a collaborative project. So London is one of 4 cities partnering in the project. So we're working alongside Hamburg, the city of Copenhagen and the city of Vantaa, which is in the Helsinki region of Finland. And LWARB is leading the London cluster, but our other partners include the GLA, as well as Imperial College, Grimshaw Architects, Clear Village, the UK Green Building Council and the BRE. And we're focusing on 3 specific parts of circular construction, which tie in well with some of the themes that have already been discussing today. So the first one, our kind of nice jazzy term for it is urban mining, but this is increasing the reuse and high value recycling of demolition materials. The second theme we're focusing on is aiming to avoid demolition through transformation of the existing built environment to meet our current demands. And the third theme is flexible design to allow for adaptation and demountability in the future. So touching on a lot of what David was talking about, very much thinking about the layers concept. So across these 3 focus areas, we are developing tools and strategies. We're going to be doing demonstration projects, 36 projects across these 3 themes and the 4 cities. And we'll be using all the data and insight that we get from those activities, like I said at the beginning, to produce both the evidence and the tools that are needed to implement circular construction at a much bigger scale to what it's currently being used for. What we're hoping to achieve with all of this is a reduction in the virgin material use associated with construction of 20%, cost savings of 15%, and also to demonstrate the carbon emission reductions and waste reductions that can be achieved through implementing these principles at a city scale. This links in well, I hope you agree, with what we've been hearing about already in relation to policy SI7, in relation to the targets for construction and demolition waste. and it also ties in very well with the principles that are being promoted in the circular economy statements. And ultimately, it's driving us forward to London being a zero carbon city. So we're doing quite a range of different activities throughout the circuit project, and I've tried to pull out here the key things that we're doing that over the next 3 years is going to help the smooth implementation of the circular economy statements. We think we're going to be doing a lot of things both to support those who have to produce them in terms of the designers and consultants who are out there, and also for planning officers, whether that's in the London boroughs or in the GLA, who are responding to them. So I'll just list through some of the things that we're going to be doing. As Rohan's already showed you, there's quite a lot of forms and data and information required in the submission of circular economy statements. So we have a package of work that can hopefully help develop some templates to further standardize that and maybe improve automation or efficiency of that. We are going to be producing case studies highlighting implementation of circular economy principles. So we're not just going to be focusing on our demonstrators, we'll also be collecting as many examples of successful implementation from across London and making that publicly available to everyone. So that we've all got more case studies to refer to of what's possible. We'll be taking the specific elements from some of those themes and then producing that into guidance that can further support the circular economy statement guidance in terms of things such as pre-demolition audits that's mentioned in the circular economy statement, and also around maximising reuse. I've seen a couple of the questions already are asking about reuse versus recycling, so we're going to be doing work to explore that, and we'll be passing that knowledge on back to the rest of the industry. We're going to be creating an online circularity wiki where we won't just be putting the new information that we create, we're going to collate as much of the existing information that we can, so that will be available to all. We're going to set that up over the next 6 months, maintain it throughout the life of the project, but then pass it on as a legacy item as well, so that's not going to disappear. We'll look at how we can further improve the availability and visibility of data through online platforms, and in particular we'll be looking around material exchange, so again touching on that reuse question that's come up. Looking at 3D technologies such as augmented reality and virtual reality to see how citizens can become more involved in the built environment and hopefully leading to more circular outcomes. And finally, we're going to be developing and delivering training courses and e-learning modules that will be targeted both to planning officers and also to industry trying to respond to the statements. If you're interested in finding out more or getting involved, we've got a mailing list and the links on our website, which is going to be shared shortly. You won't be bombarded if you sign up to our mailing list. We just do a quarterly newsletter with some of the key highlights. If you want to be bombarded more than that, we have social media feeds on both LinkedIn and Twitter. That's the best way to find out about any events that we're holding. So we hold regular networking events. We'll also hold we'll be holding workshops on particular parts of the project as well over the next couple of years. And that's also where you'll hear first about any publications of our results. If you're from one of the London boroughs, you're very welcome to join our Urban Decision Maker Forum. We meet every 3 to 4 months to discuss what we should be doing for the project and making sure that the outputs are meeting the needs of the boroughs as well. And then finally, if you have any projects already that you'd like to propose as case studies, feel free to get in touch. My contact details are going to be shared. And also, once you start trying to implement these things after the guidance is finally approved and you're finding things that you'd welcome more guidance on, let me know and I can see if we can steer the outputs of the circuit project to help fill in more of those gaps. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrea. That was fantastic and great to hear about what the circuit project is and what you're looking to do and support the work that we and ACOM are bringing forward. We've had a good number of questions in the chat. I think we're up to 6 questions, but do please keep putting them in. Or maybe we have 7 now. I'm going to come to Dave first of all with a question. So this question is, the target of 95% reuse and recycling doesn't force much change from the current downcycling scenario that you described at the start. Unfortunately, referring to the waste hierarchy isn't the answer. Reuse can be ignored if it's not practicable. So is there any intention to introduce specific targets for reuse separately to recycling?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And I think, yeah, I agreed. The 95% is the sort of end of that sort of set of principles, the 9 principles that were mapped out by Rowan earlier. And in the guidance, I think it is pretty clear in the guidance that really what the GLA are looking for are some changes here. So actually starting by thinking about lean design principles, design for adaptability, and finding better ways, as well as reusing existing buildings and things as a sort of fundamental principle. And I think that is sort of, having done all that, then can we also make sure that what's left is done the best with that we can. So I think what's been really interesting, and I was just typing up one answer there, was actually that I think it's been generally very well received as a set of principles, and we're getting lots of positive feedback. There's a fair few developers that are already including circular economy principles into their design briefs, their development briefs and things. And I think there's definitely a shift in the right direction. Yes, but I mean, to the other, to answer your question, yes, in the long term, I think the idea would be this would be evolve, and that would be more, as we get more data, we will start to set, be able to set targets that actually show, based on what is current good practice and what is best practice, and gradually move things in the way that the energy strategy has moved on over the last sort of 15 years or so as well, from 10% renewable energy to 35% reduction in net zero. So I think all of those things will happen. This is new policy, new guidance. This is fantastic, but it's just inception at the moment.
That's great. Thanks very much, Dave, for tackling that one. We've had a couple of questions. I see you've already put some answers in, Dave, which is great, but I think useful to reiterate for everybody. So we've had a question about whether material quantities have to be in kilograms, similar to the whole life carbon work. Sometimes the information might only be available in terms of volume or area of materials.
Yes, sorry, I've answered this one, but I was suggesting we really need it in kilograms because we want some consistency about what we're getting here. So we want everything the same, and then that sort of comes back to my earlier point that then that enables to do some analysis and see where things are sitting. And yes, I agree. There are you often get meters cubed or meters squared from cost plans, but I think we've got something like 30 circular economy statements now through already, and some of those were even written just as the guidance was just first coming out. So a pretty enthusiastic response, I think, and a lot of those are managing to find out kilograms by either using, because there's a simple calculation, simple conversion factor you can use for, if you know what the material is, usually that to be able to work out using the density. So it is possible. Yes, that's the plan, please.
Andrea, you want to come in too?
Well, yeah, just kind of almost adding to the question, there is the whole life carbon requirement as well, which is asking for the same information. So by getting that information, you're able to do what you need for the circular economy statement and to complete your whole life carbon calculations. Good point. Thank you. Yeah, that's really exactly.
We've had a question again. I think, Dave, you've looked at answering this, but I think it's still a really pertinent one that I know a lot of people are interested in, about retention of existing buildings, and how we're challenging that approach, the assumption that retaining an existing building might not be viable, the issues around facade retention and what happens there. So yeah, is there anything you want to add to that? Dave, first of all.
I think it's a really good point, and I think at the planning stage, it's usually too late to influence that decision. That decision has usually already been made, although I suppose it is maybe possible to push back to some extent. What I'm hoping personally will happen is that because the guidance, the policy and the guidance are driving more people down that route to think about retention and the whole resource sort of implications of demolishing and stuff, that I'm hoping there'll be some back pressure back up through the system, and actually people will start thinking more about, oh, hang on a minute, the GLA is going to pick this up if I knock down this perfectly good building and build a new one, when actually I could have retained it and refurbished it. And I'm hoping that will then influence those sort of future decisions. It's interesting actually just hearing from the market that there is a sort of bit of sort of hearsay, but I'm hearing more from developers now saying that they are looking at their existing assets and saying, what can we do with this? And that might be more from an economic perspective right now, rather than from necessarily being just to do with the GLA's policy. But I think there's lots of issues to untangle there, and I think what's been really interesting as well is seeing the AJ, the Architects Journal drive to retrofit first campaign, which I think has been very, very useful and very timely, picking up on as someone else has mentioned about tax, that you are penalised for refurbishment, whereas you get a tax break if you build new, and that's something that they've been lobbying the government to whether they can change that, and there's a couple of other lobbying points there going forward. So I think some of these issues are outside of the control of the GLA, but hopefully the pressure will change that a bit.
Andrea or Rohan, did you want to come in on refurbishment versus demolition and rebuild? Any further comments you wanted to make, Andrea?
I was just saying it's something we've already started looking at as well, and we've been doing some quite in-depth interviews with developers to try and untangle what is driving that decision, and as David was just saying, when is that happening? And we were getting the same signals as David mentioned, that it is maybe starting to change a little bit, that there is more of a consideration upfront for refurbish rather than demolish. I think one of the interesting things about the circular economy statement is that it feels to me like it forces you to know a lot more about your existing building quite at a much earlier stage in the process than you normally would. And so the fact that you might know a bit more about it might mean that you're more inclined to refurbish it anyway, because you might appreciate its value a bit more. But then apart from all that, this specific area is one of the things we're hoping to be able to produce some good case studies, particularly looking at the economic aspects as well, just to help bolster those difficult discussions that might happen very early on in a project's life cycle.
Thank you very much. Rohan, anything to add on this issue?
Not much to add, but just to pick up on Andrea's point about kind of building a kind of an evidence base almost for the benefits of of applying the principles. I think it's fair to say that a big part of what we'll be doing going forward is kind of monitoring the circular economy commitments that come in through the statements, and seeing what happened to them post planning and post completion, and using that to kind of build good practice, but also shape our policy going forward. I mean that is quite kind of a long time period, but that is the intention as well.
That's great, thank you very much. I think moving on from that topic, we've had a couple of questions that are sort of related to each other, really around kind of the wider sphere of demolition, reuse and recycling. So the question that's at the top of the question list, there's been a clear distinction and preference for material reuse over recycling. Are there any infrastructures being put in place, policies, storage space and so forth, to allow demolition contractors to privilege reuse over recycling, since recycling's already been relatively well established? And then there's a sort of related question actually from the same person, talking about, sorry, just reminding myself what it says. Yeah, material reuse has seen a gradual decline in the UK, and it could be around privately owned reclamation yards that are shrinking in size and in numbers. So how are privately owned reclamation yards, how relevant are they in supporting the ambitions of the circular economy statement? And will they be supported at all to continue promoting reuse? So I think that's a slightly wider question that's away from the circular economy statements, but Rohanna, it might be more around waste and some of the other policies in the London plan about the circular economy.
Yeah, I don't think there are any like specific policies that are to do with the things that you mentioned, for example, storage space, but those are potentially good ideas, and we definitely welcome that feedback in the consultation. But yeah, there's definitely a need to have the kind of infrastructure available to support the reuse economy, if you will. And part of the work we're doing, which is kind of separate to the circular economy statements, but I mean, in the same domain, I mean, I'm also doing it. It is about waste planning, so and ensuring that we have adequate land for waste management, and supporting sites that come forward that kind of drive things up the waste hierarchy. So supporting sites that come forward where we're expecting waste management to be focused around that field of reusing stuff, and that's something we will try to push through borough waste plans and things like that that are required to be submitted as part of the kind of local plans and development plans. So I think that's one way of doing it. But I think, like you said, yeah, like the question said, although I've lost the question now. But
oh, sorry,
more
I put it into the dismissed list.
Oh, that's all right. But I think the point is that yeah, we definitely do need to have the infrastructure in place, and kind of the land that supports reuse.
Dave?
I agree. No, that's really good to hear. I mean, I think for me, what I think is interesting is by implementing this policy and the guidance is hopefully what it does is people start to see opportunities to set up these sorts of organisations again. I think, like you say, it has been declining over time, and it is interesting seeing. We're already seeing some organisations. I mean, there's some guys now that will remanufacture raised floor tiles, for example, is one I use quite often as an example. Where and I think so. The idea of the sort of brokers, I think, will become more and more. So people who will take stuff from buildings and clean them up, remanufacture them, re-warranty them, and then sell them back to make money is a and as Andrea mentioned about urban mining it really is becoming a thing. It's so I think there's money to be made and businesses to be set up, and I'm hoping that this will create a fertile environment to do that.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, building on that, kind of similar to Rohan, like separate from what I've been talking about, but still me, we've been having a number of conversations with some of the boroughs as part of their like green recovery strategies, and considering the idea of circular economy hubs, which centers for innovation and reuse and remanufacturing and retesting. So for that innovation that David was just describing. So I think there's it's starting that kind of momentum is hopefully building up, but and also though, just to echo something that David was said with a specific example, not to underestimate the impact that this kind of policy can have in terms of stimulating the market. So I was speaking with some people quite randomly from Vancouver's waste management department a few weeks ago, and they were saying they implemented a new policy. It was a different policy because it was around the amount of certain types of buildings had to be deconstructed. That was the policy, but that suddenly stimulated a demand in the reuse market because suddenly there was material available because it had been dismantled carefully rather than demolished. So these types of policies can provide the market stimulus as well.
Absolutely, thanks very much, Andrea. And just to reiterate what Rohan was saying, with another hat on, I work on London's industrial land policies and the implementation of those, and obviously a lot of waste sites, a lot of sites that might be looking at doing sort of circular economy work happen on industrial areas, and we're really keen to make sure we're retaining London's industrial capacity across the city. And a big part of that, or not necessarily a big part of that, but part of that is to make sure we're providing sufficient capacity for what we know could be an increased demand for waste uses because of the need for circular economy sites that might well take up a bit more space than other sorts of waste uses might traditionally have done so. So anyway, moving on to another question. Top of the list, we've got a question here. What's your advice to design teams that don't have a bill of materials finalised before planning, and the detailed circular economy statement asks for it to be submitted for planning? So how flexible are we going to be to missing information on the table? I think, Rohan, I'll come to you for that one. Oh, you're on mute, Rohan. You've won the award.
It was going to be one of us, and it was me. Yeah, so as the question said, I think so we want to see the bill of materials submitted as part of as part of your planning application, and I think you'd have to justify why you can't produce this information. Dave, I don't know if you had any reflections on what you're seeing in from the circular economy statements that you've got in about how well this information is being provided at the moment.
Yeah, I say the vast majority are able to provide something. Agreed, it's not necessarily a final bill of materials, but we're getting at least the first few first few layers of the building. Generally, people know kind of the weight of the structure and the substructure, and have made some allowances for the facade and even to some extent what the internal partitions, at least what the self weight of those is going to be. So generally, they do know that, and as we find mostly people are getting it from the cost plans. But as Andrea said, that now that there's also the requirement to do the or the policy and the guidance around whole life carbon, there's an awful lot more detail required to prepare that document, and that's gradually being implemented.
I think it's worth saying it's about kind of estimating where you don't know, about justifying whatever you do estimate and providing that evidence.
Thanks very much. A couple more questions, I think, before we look to wrap this up. So just bear with me whilst I find it. So we've got a question which asks about projects that are already integrating circular economy statement principles. Dave, as you rightly say, we've got some examples in the circular economy primer document. Is there any particular ones that we want to make a bit of a fuss about? Is there anything we're particularly keen on that we point people towards, or any particular approaches that we think are worth emphasising here? Dave, if you want to come in on that.
Well, a lot of them are just sort of pre-planning at the status at the moment, but I mean, sort of some of the things that are coming out are people seem to be quite keen on writing some sort of deconstruction plan or an end-of-life plan. So that's coming up quite regularly. A lot of talk about sort of lean design principles and things, and reducing the amount of material use. What else? Adaptability comes up sometimes. Yeah, I couldn't name a particular project. I don't. Well, I think one that stands out in my mind was Clarion Housing have developed a circular economy strategy actually for their Merton redevelopment, and I thought that was really interesting that they'd actually gone, because it's a 12-year program to redevelop a whole estate, a large estate. They've really thought about what they can do, because it's a sort of fairly sort of different opportunity from a sort of in and out sort of knock down and rebuild. It's actually a regeneration over time, and so they've actually not only put a strategy out there, but they've also worked out what they think they're going to save in terms of, you know, less transport to and from the site, less virgin material requirements, less waste and resources needed. So I think, and they've actually got some numbers to that, which I thought was really interesting. I think we've got that. That's written up in, I think it's in the UK GBC guidance. If you Google UK GBC circular economy client guide, I think that's the one. That's mentioned as a case study in there. As I say, the primer's got lots of other examples in there about sort of, I mean, any sort of project where we're sort of retaining and refurbishing stuff is always going to be on the right side of this. Hopefully that's okay. Try to answer it.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you, Dave. Andrea, were there any examples that you've seen that you're particularly excited about?
Challenging question. Well, I think that's one of the reasons why we need to put in these case studies together, because actually I think a lot of projects do lots of different elements of this, and people aren't really aware of it. So like there's a couple of projects that I know like friends and colleagues are working on in the really early design stages. They're not like in the public domain, so I can't like say the names of the projects, but like very early design stage discussions going on around these kind of strategies and principles, and even getting quite detailed into, you know, the technical details of how this might happen and at the pre-planning stage. So I think I'm disappointed I can't tell you any specific project titles because everything I know is confidential at the moment. But yeah, and I would have pointed you to the same place that Dave has already mentioned in terms of the UK Green Building Council guidance that we put together was the current best collection that I'm aware of. But we could also just mention that those New London Awards that we were talking about just before the webinar started. So there was the mayor's category for the New London Architecture Awards this year was for circular economy, and they announced their winner as Surrey Docks Farm today, I believe. So I'll be going reading all about the exciting things that they've done and the other shortlisted projects as well.
Indeed. Okay, I think there's two more unanswered questions that we haven't got round to yet, so we'll just go to those. The one at the bottom of the list first: what's the best way to encourage and demand pre-demolition audits for developers and design teams in terms of reuse of materials? Can it be requested as part of the planning documentation, as well as acknowledge it as standard REBA stage, either stage 0 or stage 8?
Yes, it is. It's in the it's requested in the guidance as one of the supporting documents, and it's very much part of the process. And I think pretty much every circular economy statement we've seen coming through has either done one or had a very good reason why they couldn't. Maybe if there's no access to the site for COVID or something. So yes, that has been happening. And interesting, actually, it's been an interesting difference where it's a BREEAM project. If there's BREEAM on it, then actually people are quite often doing it or aware of that anyway because of BREEAM. And the real key thing then is really whether those are influencing the design, if they're being done early enough to make sure we're actually influencing the design.
Great, thank you. And then I think our last question is about the consultations themselves. So this consultation, and we've got other ones on other bits of London Plan guidance as well, all due in the middle of January. Can you describe the roadmap to adoption and why the rush on consultations? So I think that's probably one for me to tackle. So yeah, we do have quite a lot of consultation on at the moment, and we're aware that that takes resource from people to engage with that meaningfully. We have allowed 3 months for the consultation period, so it's quite a lengthy time for people to get involved, and people can start populating their answers now and well in advance of that January deadline. The impetus from us, well, we've been really keen to crack on with this. We in fact published a draft version of this bit of consultation and various other ones way back at the start of this year, back in March. but because of COVID, the mayoral elections were delayed. We thought we were going to be going into that mayoral election term and then we'll be able to crack on with this work. So that's been delayed until until May next year. But we're also really keen to crack on with that work and to hopefully look at the consultation responses and proceed to getting these finalised fairly quickly in the new year as well. So yeah, a bit of a rush. We appreciate the work that's involved in responding to this, but we just want to make sure that we're not dragging our heels in seeking to implement the London plan. Rohan, was there anything you wanted to add on that front? It's a shake of the head. And I think there was just one other question that I quite liked that I'm trying to find again whilst people are here. Here we go. Whilst this is all great in principle, is there a risk it will just be another tick box exercise? Isn't it drawing out the planning process? And are developers actually going to approach this pragmatically? So why are we bothering, guys? Do we think it's actually going to happen? Andrea, I think you think this is actually going to happen, don't you?
I do think it's actually going to happen. I think it's quite interesting though, because it does put quite an onus on the planning officers for it, and the people who are supporting the planning officers like David, for it to not be just a tick boxing exercise. But I think that because of the level of detail that's asked for, there's been quite a few questions around those bills of materials, the discussion about the pre-demolition audit information. You can't, it's not a business as usual tick box exercise to be able to tick the box. It is even ticking the box is actually doing something quite different. And I think by ticking that box, your eyes will have been opened to the possibilities that doing more than ticking the box could realise.
Great. Dave or Rohan, anything to add to that?
Not much for me, but yeah, I completely agree. I think we've designed the guidance to not be a tick box exercise, and we want it to be embedded into the design process and getting people to really think about circular economy at the early stages of design. Yeah, I hope it won't just become a tick box exercise, and I'm confident that we're seeing that it's not, even though it is early days, but we're already seeing that.
And Dave?
No, I agree. I think certainly it's been on the projects we've been working on from either side, whether we're helping developers sort of do stuff or whether we're actually looking at the CE statements. I think we're seeing, a lot, a vast majority are very positive, and actually trying to do something, at least something, even in small ways, differently, really. And I think people see it as a really exciting challenge and an interesting topic, I think, and they, I think, in the context of the climate crisis, they are recognizing. A lot of people are recognizing that something has to be done, and so I think that's all very positive. And I think even if for now we're looking at what we're getting, the responses we're getting, that's still very useful to see those numbers, and then that will hopefully in the future, in the same way that the energy policy, as I said earlier, shifted the ground from a fairly straightforward low level to a much higher level now, then I think we'll be able to do that as well, quite quickly.
Thanks very much, Dave. And I think just worth saying, obviously, this is a consultation. We do want to hear your views. Have a read of the guidance. If you think it's, if you think it reads like a tick box exercise, if you think it's not going to achieve what we want it to achieve, then please let us know. If you think it can be improved, please let us know. If you think that the principles, we haven't got those right, or you think they can go further, if you think we can say more about reuse rather than demolition, then by all means, put that into your consultation responses. I've put up on the screen the consultation deadline, just as a reminder for everybody, 15th of January, where you can find the consultation survey, where to email us for any queries, and to follow us on Twitter. We'll also, I'm sure, provide you with information following this event to tell you to remind you of how you can get involved in all of this process. So a special thank you to Andrea and Dave for being involved in this evening's session, and also to Rohan for presenting as well. Just remains for me to remind you to, as I say, please respond to the consultation, and also please to look at how you can incorporate circular economy principles in your developments, in the plans that you're doing, as you consider planning applications and planning decisions. And that's everything from us. Have a good evening, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.